Welcome to the RNL Revolution Nothing Less show. Today is November 4th, 2021. This is our 77th episode. My name is Andy Zee. I'm the host of the show. Welcome to the revolution. This is a show about and for a real revolution. This is a show about the world and for a radically new world. Our goal, our mission is nothing less than the emancipation of humanity, the overcoming of all forms of exploitation and oppression here and all over the world. Welcome you to Revolution Nothing Less means introducing you to the revolutionary leader, Bob Avakian.
Why are Black people, Latinos, and Native Americans subjected to genocidal persecution, mass incarceration, police brutality, and murder? Why is there the patriarchal degradation, dehumanization, and subjugation of all women everywhere, and oppression based on gender or sexual orientation? Why are there wars of empire, armies of occupation, and crimes against humanity? Why is there the demonization, criminalization, and deportations of immigrants and the militarization of the border? Why is the environment of our planet being destroyed? These are what we call the 5 stops. Deep and defining contradictions of this system, with all the destruction and suffering they cause, which must be protested and resisted in a powerful way, with a real determination to stop them, but which can only be finally ended by putting an end to this system itself. Why, along with all this, do we live in a world where large parts of humanity live in stark poverty, with 2.3 billion people lacking even rudimentary toilets or latrines, and huge numbers suffering from preventable diseases, with millions of children dying every year from these diseases and from starvation, while 150 million children in the world are forced to engage in ruthlessly exploited child labor. And the whole world economy rests on a vast network of sweatshops, employing large numbers of women who are regularly subjected to sexual harassment and assault. A world where 65 million refugees have been displaced by war, poverty, persecution, and the effects of global warming. Why is this the state of humanity? There is one fundamental reason. The basic nature of the system of capitalism-imperialism that we live under, and the way, because of its very nature, it continually perpetrates and perpetuates horror after horror. And in fundamental terms, we have 2 choices. Either live with all this and condemn future generations to the same, or worse, if they have a future at all, or make revolution.
That was Bob Avakian from his 2018 talk, Why We Need an Actual Revolution and How We Could Really Make Revolution. People care deeply about one or all of these 5 stops. And because these outrages, these crimes against the humanity of people all around the world and the planet itself cannot be solved, cannot be ended under the capitalist imperialist system that we live under, this is why a real revolution is necessary and why it is possible. In today's show, we're going to dig into 2 of these 5 stops. First, the environment, because of a United Nations conference that's going on in Glasgow, Scotland, where rulers from all around the world are going to be talking with high purpose and highfalutin language that they're about to save the planet, while meanwhile the planet is burning and drowning, and what they're actually doing is nothing of the kind. And then we're also going to have a segment on patriarchy, the systemic oppression of women that's woven together into the very fabric of capitalism-imperialism. We're doing this segment because the right of women to have an abortion, to be full participating members of society is hanging in the balance with Supreme Court decisions about that right taking place next month, or hearings on that. What's more, these crimes, these horrors are unnecessary in today's world. There is the productive capacity, the technology, the people, and their creativity that could go to work on these problems. But to do that, the system we live under must be gone. On our website, revcom.us, there is a must-read article by Bob Avakian, Why the World is So Messed Up and What Can Be Done to Radically Change This. A basic scientific understanding. The article begins with this, quote, in today's world, to fundamentally change society, you must seize power, overthrow the existing state power, and establish a new state power, end quote. And what is more, we are living today in what is a once-in-a-lifetime moment, a rare circumstance in history, when a revolution in a powerful country like the United States could really be possible. And over the last 6 months, we have featured on the Revolution Nothing Less show a declaration, a call to get organized now for a real revolution that explains why that revolution could now be possible and what we need to do to get organized for that now. These are momentous, these are fraught times. There are 3 trials going on now that concentrate another one of the 5 stops, the oppression of Black people. There was an election just this past Tuesday that also concentrated the oppression of Black people. The 3 trials are one in Kenosha, Wisconsin, a trial of a white supremacist punk, Kyle Rittenhouse, who shot 3 people, killed 2 who are part of the Black Lives Matter movement, 3 white people who were out in the streets protesting the shooting of Jacob Blake by the police in Kenosha, Wisconsin. In Georgia, there's a trial of 3 people for the murder of Ahmaud Arbery, where these 3 people hunted like slave catchers of old in a pickup truck and shot him in cold blood. And then in Virginia, in Charlottesville, Virginia, there's a civil suit against the fascist white supremacist organizations that protested there to defend the Confederate monuments that were throughout that town, who murdered or caused the death of one young woman, Heather Heyer, who we featured on this show in the past, and were chanting the most vile, not only white supremacist racist slogans, but also anti-Semitism.
Will not replace us! Jews will not replace us! Jews will not replace us!
The degradation and the attack on Jewish people, and this is a big part of the fascist program in this country. It's called the replacement theory, and we'll get into that in a future episode. And also this past week in Virginia, there was an election for governor that Glenn Youngkin was elected, and he is somebody who ran at the heart of his program on banning the teaching of what he called critical race theory, which is not being taught in the schools there, but what in essence was anything about racism or slavery in the schools of Virginia. So this, too, as part of the overall political situation in this country, is something we need to get into further. But for today's show, we're going to focus in on the environment, the conference in Glasgow, and on the right of women to abortion. I want to welcome my colleague and friend and comrade, Raymond Lotta, to the RNL Revolution Nothing Less show.
Well, thanks for having me on, Andy.
Okay, for those who haven't seen Raymond before on our show, Raymond is a revolutionary. He's a revolutionary political economist. He's a follower of Bob Avakian and an advocate for the new communism developed by Bob Avakian. And along with myself, we are spokespeople for the Revolution Bookstore in New York City, in Harlem. So, Raymond, all week long, the Glasgow, Scotland conference, the 26th meeting of the United Nations Climate Change Group has been underway. What is this conference? Why is it important? And what are the interests of the people in paying attention to and acting in relationship to this conference?
Andy, these conferences, are ostensibly aimed and purposed to deal with climate change, to make agreements, to take measures, to curb emissions of carbon, greenhouse gases, that are heating up the planet. And the fact of the matter is that since these conferences have been convened, global emissions have risen, the climate crisis has worsened, and it's a tip-off that, on the eve of this conference, Joe Biden, President of the United States, who has been draping himself in the mantle as a leader for acting on the climate crisis, urged, oil producing and natural gas producing countries to ramp up production. This tells you something about, what is actually, going on and not going on. So these conferences, they're a window into the fact that this system of capitalism, imperialism, and its rulers, the rulers over this system, are leading humanity over a cliff.
Yeah, I think that's important. This has been a year we've featured this on the show of people of the most massive fires from Greece to California, floods, unbelievable, atmospheric rivers deluging areas, and yet tremendous droughts with, millions of climate refugees. And this is a lot more than, this is not just hypocrisy, it's actually a charade, as you put it in your article on revcom.us. But you've also said that for climate change to actually redress, to actually deal with climate change, we need system change. So what do we mean? Bob Avakian's done a lot of recent writing about what is a system. What do we mean by system change?
By system and by system change, let's talk about that. This is a capitalist imperialist system, that's driven by profit, driven by the commandment to expand or die, to gain greater market share, control over resources. And it's this system that treats nature as a cost-free input, into production for profit. Capitalism, imperialism, by its very nature, because its metric and its motive is profit, and because it's guided by this commandment that the system has to expand, constantly expand, cheapen production to increase to increase that profit, it is at war with nature. That is the essence of the matter. It is at war with nature. And in order for us to protect this planet, to preserve nature, we have to overthrow this system and bring into being a system, an economic, social, and political system that puts the interest of humanity first, that puts the preservation and the repair and the protection of the ecosystems above national development.
So how would a socialist system, as envisioned in the Constitution for a new socialist republic in North America, be better able to and have a real good chance for being able to undo the damage that's been done by this system to the environment, and also go forward to provide a sustainable way to provide for the needs of humanity here and around the world?
I'm holding up the Constitution.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about, brother.
This is written by Bob Avakian. I mean, what's remarkable about this document is it sets out, how a new socialist society would function, its governing institutions. It sets out how this society would meet the needs of people and work to overcome all the great inequalities without plundering, the planet, and not based on exploitation. It sets forth how this society would be part of and would be advancing the process of a world revolution to put an end to all exploitation and oppression. And what's very central to our discussion, Andy, is it lays out how this economy and society could go to work on this environmental crisis and develop in such a way that is rational and sustainable. That's one big difference between capitalism, imperialism, and the socialist mode of production. That's what we're talking about here. socialism, which is a system in which the resources of society, the means of producing the wealth of society are publicly owned and are subject to a conscious, rational plan of development based on and guided by meeting the interest of humanity, the betterment of humanity, and the protection of the planet. So this is what is possible. Once you overthrow this system and you seize hold of the means of production, you are able on that basis to organize and coordinate production to meet the needs of society, to go to work on this planetary crisis consciously, rationally, and with speed and determination. That's not possible under this system.
I want to go to a couple other things, but first I want to just come back and contrast that. You were talking about the commandment of expand or die, the competition among the capitalists themselves. If you could go back to that, the why these capitalists can't actually, and their representatives at this conference can't actually do what they say they want to do.
Well, look, let's just examine, fossil fuels as they function within this, capitalist imperialist economy. They are highly profitable, and they are deeply embedded in the infrastructure of this, of the advanced capitalist economies. These fossil fuels, are essential to the global supply chains that we hear so much about now because of the disruptions during the pandemic. These global supply chains, that are pollution intensive, that are based, on super exploited labor, especially in the global South, in the third world countries. These global supply chains that are essential to the profitability of an Apple, that are essential to the profitability of a General Motors, they require, the cheap input of fossil fuels. And these fossil fuels are also essential to the maintenance of the US empire. The fact is that the US military is fueled by oil. And this is all part of the workings of this system. And there's heavy investments. There's what's called sunk capital, heavy investments in this sector. And these had to be made good on from the profit and loss ledger, the oil companies, the banks. But as I said, there's a larger picture, which is the whole structure of an economy organized around profit. And their profitability rests on cheapness of production, the access to vital raw materials like oil. This is the way the system functions and operates. And it is not the case that, it's just one capitalist, super capitalist country. There are these imperialist powers that are vying with each other for control over regions and resources. So what motivates them, what guides them, are the strategic interest of a system that operates this way. And they're not able, because of private ownership, they're not able to seize hold of society as a whole, to direct resources to where they would be needed quickly. The example you gave of Biden, where he said, look, we have to ramp up oil production because in the short run, we need, to keep the economy, functioning as it's functioning. And this is something about capitalism. Short-term interests, lie in maximizing profit. But those oil, increased oil production is emitting carbon that's going to stay in the atmosphere for 300, for 500, for hundreds and hundreds of years. That's the short term from their standpoint, but think of the long-term consequences. This is not a system that's based on any kind of rational long-term perspective for protecting the environment. It's guided by this short-term maximization, and then their strategic step back is how to keep this system that's based on short-term maximization in place, intact, expanding, so as not to be endangered by other imperial forces. So this is all of what's in play here at this conference.
I want to move on to something else or related topic, which is that some of the people we've been talking to have raised to us that well, you're right. I agree that ultimately, or even not ultimately, but I agree that revolution is necessary to fundamentally reverse climate change and for a sustainable economy. Can't do it under capitalism. But why shouldn't we work on two tracks? We should fight for some reforms now while we also are working for revolution.
In 1990, the share of natural gas and coal in power generation in the United States was 65%. Now, 30 years later, it's 60%. In other words, it's only a 5% decline in the share of coal and natural gas in the generation of electrical power in the United States. And this again speaks to the way in which fossil fuel is so deeply foundational to the ways in which this capitalist imperialist economy operates domestically and globally. And also the fact is that under this system you can't make that kind of rapid conversion. This is what keeps coming up. This is Biden's point. We can't do it quickly. So the kinds of changes that people want to take place can only take place in minuscule ways. In other words, for every amount of emissions that is converted from carbon to solar and wind, there's a so much greater, an astronomically, exponentially greater amount, multiples of that are being emitted because of the current structure of the system. So that this is not commensurate. These kinds of small changes are not commensurate with what's needed, exactly because of what you and I just talked about, that the carbon is already in the atmosphere, from decades and centuries, and every, day that this system goes on longer, every year, all these emissions continue to aggravate this crisis. And the idea of somehow, lessening it, mitigating it, because that's better than nothing, is not speaking to what's actually required, which is to radically and rapidly reduce carbon emissions, to shut down that oil industry, to keep the oil in the ground. That's what has to be done, to restructure an economy totally, away from, this kind of wasteful this wasteful fossil fuel foundation, to restructure an economy away from private auto, consumption and use. And this is not going to happen within this, within this structure. So the answer to this is that these small measures, these small reforms, are not speaking to the enormity of this, nor are they speaking to the accelerating pace of this crisis, which is why we need total system change, the overthrow of this system and the creation of a whole other economic and social system to go to work on it.
Yeah, I was just thinking as you were describing the situation, it's kind of like there's a train track leading towards that cliff you were talking about, and it's going down a cliff and it's going very, very fast. And these proposals, however well-intentioned people mean them, it's like putting your foot out and trying to slow down that train that nonetheless is moving towards the cliff, when the actual thing that has to happen is we have to get off that train or derail that train and go back up the hill. And yes, it's going to be a hard way to go, but it's actually a way that could lead to the emancipation and liberation of humanity. I just want to move to this one last question, because we need to urgently organize for an actual revolution, because the urgency that people feel around the climate is actually materially founded. It actually is a very urgent situation, and it is reason enough to put everything you've got into organizing today for an actual revolution, digging into that Constitution that you were holding up before, seeing what it says and popularizing that in the leader, Bob Avakian, who wrote it. But at the same time, there is a very important role for people to be standing up against this charade. And worse, it's really a crime that's going on in Glasgow in this conference. So I wonder if you could just talk a bit about that for our viewers.
Well, I mean, look, there's a basic point of departure and a basic, point of orientation here, Andy, and that is anyone who cares about the fate of the planet, cannot stand idly by. And, the fact that people are agonizing over this and people, are that there are sections of young people in particular, there are scientists, who are, putting out the call that we need to act. And, that desire to save the planet, is an extremely important factor on the terrain now. It's a factor that's very favorable for revolution. And when people take to the streets, when people are acting, in protest, this has a very good effect in society. What is it? It's actually a statement. It's a statement from people that we are not going to accept this. It helps to wake people up. And also, if we, the revolutionaries, are among the people who are, involved in protests, we can help raise people's sights, to the possibility, the real possibility of a whole other way, society, economy, and people could be in a different society, a different economy, which is not organized around profit, but which is organized around putting an end to all exploitation and oppression and protecting the planet. So it's very important, but I think, we have to also emphasize that it's not enough just to be engaged in this resistance, because we can look at the very example of the XL pipeline, that got shut down, but now Biden, yes, climate protector Biden, as he would like to be known, has authorized approval of what's called Line 3, another oil pipeline from Canada through, through the Midwest, and he's authorized new drilling in the Gulf of Mexico, and they're giving subsidies to the fossil fuel companies for a very dubious technology, which is carbon capture, which just prolongs, the existence of this whole fossil fuel based, economy that's serving the interests of profit and empire. So what I'm saying is that these protests are very important from the standpoint of raising consciousness and contributing to this deep questioning. But this brings me to the important pamphlet statement by Bob Avakian. This is a rare time when revolution becomes possible, why this is so, why that is so, and how to seize on this rare opportunity. And in this, the point is made that as the normal way society has been ruled as the normal way society has been ruled is failing to hold things together, and society is increasingly being ripped apart, this can shake people's belief that the way things have always been is the only way things can be. It can make people more opening to questioning. In a real sense, it can force people to question the way things have been and whether they have to stay that way. And this is all the more likely to happen if the revolutionary forces are out among the people, shining a light on the deeper reality of what is happening and why, and bringing out that there is an alternative to living this way.
All right. Well, Raymond, I think we're going to leave it there. I think that's actually, that is if you will, a charge and a mission to our audience. So, Raymond, I look forward to seeing you back on the RNL show again and seeing you in New York City fairly soon.
Well, thanks for having me on, and we have to continue this discussion.
All right, so we want to invite all of you watching to a talk back, a question and answer with Raymond Lotta about the topic that he was just getting into, the environmental emergency and how capitalism-imperialism is destroying our planet. We want to encourage you. It'll be tomorrow, November 5th at 4:30 Pacific time, 5:30 Mountain Time, 6:30 Central Time, and 7:30 Eastern Time. We want to encourage you to register for that, be part of it. It'll be over Zoom. Andy Zee will be hosting, and really bring your toughest questions about this system, about how we could solve this crisis with a new state power, a socialist state power, about how we can make this revolution, or whatever else is pressing on your mind. We need to get into this together, and there's a great opportunity tomorrow. So again, sign up for this, DM at the RevComs on social media, any platform.
Thank you, Sunsara. Yeah, now we want to present a segment, another segment from the film that we began the show with, why we need an actual revolution, how we can really make revolution. This is a segment that's titled The Destruction of the Planet by Capitalism-Imperialism. This is from the speech itself. But before we go to that segment of the film, I just want to say that Raymond and I spoke briefly about Bob Avakian. You saw him earlier. But we just have to, I just want to let you know that there's never been a leader like this in this country. Bob Avakian it's an extraordinary thing that at a moment like this in world history and U.S. history, that we have a leader who has developed a new framework for the emancipation of all of humanity. Somebody who's developed a strategy for an actual revolution. And the kinds of questions that are gone into in the Constitution that Raymond spoke about concern things that most people haven't even thought about yet. Like, how do you make a society that meets the needs of people and that allows people to flourish, but is also going to work on overcoming all the forms of oppression and thinking that have existed for millennia? This is really a very important person that we cherish on this show and that we follow his leadership. So I just wanted to bring that to you before you see this excerpt that's dealing with the topic of the environment.
The Destruction of the Planet by Capitalism-Imperialism. The very fact that global warming is one of the major reasons why there are today a greater number of refugees, 65 million, than at any time since World War II, is one powerful indicator of the severity of the climate crisis, which is increasing in intensity at an accelerating rate. The scientific evidence is overwhelming. The climate crisis poses a very real and growing threat to human civilization. And human activity, in particular the production and use of oil and other fossil fuels, is a major cause of this intensifying crisis. The accelerated melting of the ice sheets in Antarctica, the destruction of vast expanses of rainforests, the despoiling of other key parts of the earth, including the oceans, with the terrible consequences for plant and animal species, which are also vital for human existence. All this can only continue and even further accelerate with human society under the domination of the capitalist imperialist system. Despite conferences and agreements which claim to be addressing this crisis, but which are dominated by the countries that are the biggest contributors to this crisis, despite talk and even some steps to develop sources of energy as alternatives to fossil fuels, despite all this, the very nature of the capitalist imperialist system dictates that competing capitalists controlling billions of dollars of investments, and the governments of the major world powers in particular, are compelled to contend with each other for markets, cheap labor and raw materials, including fossil fuels, and for control of strategic parts of the world. This leads not only to economic and political conflicts, but repeatedly to wars, which themselves have a devastating effect on the environment. And it is worth noting that the U.S. military is the single largest institutional consumer of oil in the world. To make matters even worse, this system has now brought forth a fascist regime to power in the U.S., which is determined to shatter agreements and roll back regulations that offer even minor, if completely insufficient, protections for the environment, and to unleash forces whose effect on the environment, if persisted in, could actually lead to the destruction of human civilization. Obviously, we have only one Earth as a home for humanity. And this climate crisis can only be fundamentally and ultimately addressed on a world scale. But a first great step or leap can be taken by wresting power from the capitalist imperialist system in its most powerful stronghold and making this a source of inspiration and base of support for people around the world in rising up to overthrow and abolish all systems and relations of exploitation, oppression, plunder, and destruction of the environment and of human beings who can only continue to exist and to thrive through a rational and planned interaction with the rest of nature. From all this, it stands out very sharply that we live in a grossly lopsided world, a world where a few dozen billionaires have as much wealth as the poorer half of humanity, and a small number of ruling classes in a small number of countries dominate, oppress, and control the destiny of the masses of humanity, with consequences that are already terrible and could, before long, become catastrophic. And in everything that I've been shining a light on regarding the world we live in under the domination of capitalism-imperialism, we are seeing the consequences of a system based on the private appropriation by competing centers of capital of wealth that is socially produced through networks of production involving vast numbers, ultimately billions of people all over the globe, who are forced now to work in conditions and relations of production that exploit and dehumanize them. It is not simply greed that drives these capitalists to constantly seek ways to more ruthlessly exploit people. It is the fact that if they do not do this, or if some other capitalists do it more successfully, that is, even more ruthlessly, then they will face the prospect of not just falling behind, but actually going under, eaten up by other capitalist sharks. It is the private appropriation of socially produced wealth and the anarchy, the feverish competition and contention that results from this, which ultimately underlies and drives all the horrors that are concentrated in the 5 stops and the conditions to which the masses of humanity are continually subjected. The solution is to replace this system of private appropriation with a system where the socially produced wealth is also socially appropriated by a government actually representing the masses of people instead of a class of capitalist exploiters. And this wealth is then utilized on the basis of conscious planning in the interests and for the benefit of the people of society and ultimately the whole world. How this can be done is spelled out in the Constitution for the new Socialist Republic in North America. This is the fundamental difference between the society and world we have with the system of capitalism-imperialism that we are forced to live under and the world we could have. The bridge between these two worlds is revolution, a real revolution. Let's be honest, this is a difficult road, but there is no other way to finally put an end to the horrors that are continually brought forth by this system. And as hard as this is, it is possible if we go about it the right way, with the right outlook and approach, the right goals and methods, the right strategy and plan. So this is what I'm going to dig into through the course of this talk.
So that was Bob Avakian from Why We Need an Actual Revolution and How We Could Really Make a Revolution. This is from the speech he gave in 2018. And today, in this rare time when revolution becomes possible, we're beginning to really organize in earnest people into the ranks of the revolution and to impact broadly society with why a revolution and only a revolution can solve the problems that face humanity. And as part of preparing the ground and winning people to this revolution, we're having to take on a whole lot of other programs that may sound radical, may seem progressive, but actually will not change the world, but rather leave it as it is. And to advance this process, we've had an incredible run of articles from the revolutionary leader Bob Avakian that appear on the pages of revcom.us that not only take on these various theories and ideas that people are taking up that are far short of, and in most cases in opposition to, an actual revolution and the transformation of society towards a new socialist republic. He's been taking these on, and he's been going very deeply into the necessity for revolution rooted in the way this system actually works, the system of capitalism, imperialism, and on that basis, how we can go forward. And we've highlighted these on our website. So I think, Sunsara, we should just highlight a few of the titles that you can find on revcom.us. I'll start with the first one that went up earlier this past week. It's titled, Workers' Democratic Control, a Damaging Delusion, Impossible Under Capitalism, Destructive Under Socialism. We need a revolutionary transformation of society and the world, not a bourgeois democratic continuation or restoration of capitalism. This is a tremendous work, really repays study.
There's also available at Revcom, Living Marxism versus Vulgarized Marxism, Liberating Revolution, Not Lifeless Reformism.
And then there's Abolition, Real and Illusory. The idea that we can abolish prisons, abolish the police, all these ideas are nothing but fantasy that are leading people down into a dead end. This is a really important article.
Another piece from BA that we want to highlight is called Why the World is So Messed Up and What Can Be Done to Radically Change This, a Basic Scientific Understanding. And this is something that members of the Revolution Tour have been digging into very deeply. We're going to do Zooms to invite people into discussions of that going forward too. And there's at least a couple more we want to highlight.
Yeah, well, this next one speaks for itself. There's no right to kill with religion. Religious exemptions are not a legitimate reason for refusing vaccines.
And finally, there's other pieces you can find at revcom.us from BA, but we want to highlight a piece that's upcoming on November 8th that'll be published, titled The Nation of Islam, Not a Force for, a Force Against Emancipation. We need a real revolution. So definitely be looking for that on November 8th. So with that, I just want to remind you, if you haven't, you definitely should sign up and register for the Zoom discussion with Raymond Lotta, the question and answer that Andy will be hosting tomorrow, November 5th at 4:30 p.m. Pacific, 7:30 p.m. Eastern, and all the times in between. Since September 1st, nearly all abortions have been banned in the state of Texas. And on Monday of this week, the Supreme Court heard arguments over whether to even allow abortion providers and the Department of Justice to go to court to block this blatantly unconstitutional law. Now, I've written about what's at stake in this case at revcom.us, and we will cover it as it goes forward here on this show. But today we want to highlight another case coming before the Supreme Court on December 1st. A case out of Mississippi that bans all abortions after 15 weeks into pregnancy. This is a case that will give the Supreme Court the opportunity, if they choose to overturn abortion protections nationwide by overturning their own landmark 1973 Roe v. Wade decision that first legalized abortion nationwide. Here we want to speak to a view that is widespread among abortion rights so-called leaders and extremely deadly. This view was concentrated in an op-ed that was published in the New York Times on Monday, co-authored by Catherine Colbert and Julie F. Kay, titled "Roe is as good as gone. It's time for a new strategy." The next day, Colbert, who is a lawyer who has argued abortion rights cases before the Supreme Court in the past, appeared on Democracy Now! And distilled her basic argument. She begins like this.
I think the most important thing is we have to keep, we have to make sure that we don't keep hitting our heads against the marble staircase. Save Roe, save Roe, save Roe has been our mantra for so many years, and it no longer works because of the ultra-conservative nature of this Supreme Court.
First, by banging our heads against the marble staircase, she's talking about the Supreme Court. She's saying the Supreme Court is packed with conservative judges. Really, they should be called fascists. So let's just give up on defending Roe versus Wade, the decision that first legalized abortion. She is saying, before this right is even overturned, before the Supreme Court and the country have even heard the arguments that the lawyers will make on December 1st, before the many months before a ruling will be issued, likely in the spring or summer of 2022, months during which a fight could be mounted in the streets, where millions who do not want to see women slam backwards could be aroused to raise bloody hell and create an atmosphere where the court does not feel so free to take this right away. Before any of that, let's just give up. Let's call this what it is, capitulation. And it's as morally bankrupt as it would be devastating to women. Colbert continues.
We must instead look at three things: helping the women in the states that are going to ban abortion. And that could be as many as 20 or more states. It'll range in area from Georgia to Texas, from North Dakota all the way south to Arizona. Huge land areas in this country, abortion may be banned. And therefore, we've got to help those women get safe and legal procedures.
Okay, let's start with a map. From Georgia to Texas, from North Dakota all the way down to Arizona. She is openly saying, let's just let the state force every single woman and girl in this entire swath of the country to have a child every time they become pregnant, whether or not they want a child, no matter what else they have planned with their lives, and no matter how much devastation this might cause. As for her program of helping women travel to other states to get abortions, I want to play an excerpt from an interview I did with the lead defender of the last abortion clinic in the entire state of Mississippi. While she's not speaking directly to Colbert, her argument holds.
And I just want to remind everybody that we're the poorest state in the nation here. Women can barely afford to get to Jackson. Some can't. We're the only clinic in the state. All these people saying, you can come to Illinois, we'll help you. You can come to, are you not paying attention? They can't get 2 hours from their home in Greenwood to Jackson. How in the heck are they going to afford to get to New York? So please remember that when you're saying you can come here.
Besides how unrealistic it is to help all these women in this entire swath of the country travel to other states to get abortions, the idea that somehow, if we sit back and let abortion be criminalized in half the country, that the Christian fascist fanatics who sit on the Supreme Court and fill the Republican Party at all levels are going to allow abortion to remain legal in the rest of the country is sheer fantasy. So here, Colbert gets to the core of her program.
But most importantly, in my view, we've got to turn to the politics of this issue. We've got to turn to the political process and begin to take back those state legislators by electing people who are champions of the cause, electing people who will preserve women's rights, and begin to think about that as our most important task. Because until we control the legislatures of all of those states that will ban abortion, we will not be safe.
She says we need to turn to the politics of the issue. Fine. But on what terms? What is needed is a massive society-wide fight in the streets and in the realm of public opinion for abortion on demand and without apology. We need to be our own champions, telling the truth that forced motherhood is female enslavement. We need a fight to defeat this assault. But that's not what Colbert is talking about. She is talking about the politics of the possible, which, as Bob Avakian has pointed out, under this system and on its terms, is the politics of monstrosity. History has shown how this kind of logic of compromise, the logic of accommodating to the politics of the possible, is what allows good people to go along with and accept fascism. Colbert's program is the next step in the logic of capitulation that has been led by the Democratic Party and the mainstream women's movement over decades, the very logic and program that has gotten us into this dangerous place. At the same time, Colbert's program doesn't even take into account the acute political moment we find ourselves in now, a moment that was spoken to very powerfully by Tony Redtree several weeks ago on this show.
And you do have a court that's actually now stacked against Roe versus Wade and a lot of other fundamental rights that are happening. And you have the Democrats who are actually playing by the rules. And so they're putting their head down and kind of preparing for the long, patient struggle to push the pendulum the other way. And there's a basic thing wrong with this argument, which is actually this is not a pendulum swing. This is a moment in history where actually you have a fascist movement from the top of society down that's actually cohered to seize the ship of state and change everything, to change all the norms that people have been used to for so long in terms of the way this country has been run, from a capitalist democracy, which itself is a form of dictatorship, to one that's just openly fascist, and where they're not just going after the masses of people, but their own political opponents. So that's the moment that we're actually in.
This is the moment we're in. But out of this same situation, where the norms that have held things together for so long are being torn up, it is also possible to get organized for the real solution, an actual revolution. This, not re-seizing the legislatures, is what it will take to ensure a future where women are finally free. Why? Because patriarchy, the oppression of women by men, is woven into the system of capitalism-imperialism that rules over us, and it cannot be ended until this system is ended. This is why it took such an enormous fight to win abortion rights in the first place, and this is why they've been under attack every day since. But by overthrowing this system, establishing a new revolutionary state power, as envisioned and concretized in this Constitution for the new Socialist Republic in North America, written by Bob Avakian, it is possible to bring about a society where not only are women's most fundamental rights to reproductive freedom and control over their own destinies guaranteed, but where women and others are given backing to wage struggle to fully uproot every vestige of oppression based on gender and sexual orientation, and where all of society is mobilized to go to work to uproot oppression and exploitation in every form. This is what we need to lift our sights to. And we need a massive society-wide fight to defeat this fascist assault and also spur people to lift their heads and ask, why is this happening and what can really be done to solve it? This kind of massive struggle can not only create the best conditions to defeat this fascist assault, it can also change the whole atmosphere in society so that revolution is increasingly seen as the solution it is.
All right, thank you, Sunsara, for that polemic. It's very important. We're going to be covering the struggle at the courts over the right to abortion over the next month and actually months.
Yeah, we're going to definitely stay on this struggle. It's really important. It has high stakes for women in a very immediate sense and for the struggle for revolution. The fight against the oppression of women, BA has made this point over years, will be a driving force in making a revolution and making a real revolution that can emancipate humanity. So this is very important.
All right, and then to close the program today, we have a special treat, a song that's very timely for this environmental week, the focus on the Glasgow conference. This is a wonderful song that's composed by an extraordinary musician, a young musician. She's 11 years old. She was born in South Africa, lives in England. Nandi Bushell. She's written the song "The Children Will Rise Up." And as I said, she's 11. And the guitarist on her song is Roman Morello. He's 9 years old. And also on the video is Roman's father, Tom Morello, from the band Rage Against the Machine, and was also a solo musician. And you see Jack Black and Greta Thunberg was also in the video. So this is a real treat. Watch this. And for myself and the crew of the Revolution Nothing Less show, I want to thank you for watching, and I'll see you next week.
And we also want to see you tomorrow. Don't forget to tune in. Write to us, register for the Zoom meeting, question and answer with Raymond Lotta, hosted by Andy. We want to see you tomorrow, and we'll see you next week as well. And enjoy this video.
In the beginning, there was rock! Excellent. Your training is complete. Now go and rock the world!
Rise up. Scientists all agree that the world is warming up at an alarming rate, which could lead to loss of habitats, loss of species, famine, starvation, and mass migration. Scientists also know what is causing climate change. which is the increase of carbon dioxide and methane gases, which is generated by deforestation, overfishing, burning fossil fuels, and industrial overfarming. I cannot vote, but I can raise awareness and protest for climate change. Adults, politicians, stop playing political games with our future. Stop fighting each other. Let's all come together in unity and love to tackle humanity's biggest problem before it's too late! Children, rise up! You can do anything you put your minds to. You can be a real superhero and save the world. Demand your parents to force their government to do better. Your parents